Alright, hola, I'm Jinteki. Here we discuss the niche, obscure, underrated, and forgotten. And today we are taking a look at Into the Grid. I have 3 videos on this game on my channel already. They're just raw gameplay. To be honest, those videos aren't very good. They weren't meant to be very good. I was just using them to really test out some of this whole video making process. But this video is intended to give my feedback on the demo, having played through it a bunch of times already. That's all this video was intended to be. That is until the development team, Flatline Studios, put out a little teaser as to what is coming later on into the future. So during the second half of this video, we're going to be covering everything that they put out in that little document. Alright, let's get started. First up, let's talk about the positives. And the first major one I have is the entire game and the demo overall. I feel like this was the sort of game that was meant for me. This game really immerses you into that feeling of being a hacker, jacking into a matrix, and going in and running on some server. I'm not sure exactly what the story behind this game is, but it really does give you that feeling of dawning on some sort of neural interface, jacking into a matrix, and going to go hack some servers from probably a corporation. It's usually a corporation. I really love this genre, if you couldn't tell by the stuff that I've covered already and my name. And I geek out really hard when it comes to this full dive cyberpunk theme, but it's not just the theme. The gameplay is also really cool. Like, I love the puzzle when you're trying to get through the grid. The core gameplay loop is fun and crunchy. It makes you feel very smart when you pull off a successful run. And I love the dance in combat of trying to balance out your Vim, your max Vim, temp Vim, and then your clock, and then all your cards and the card draw and all that. It's just it's a really cool package. And it doesn't feel like too much, but it feels just complicated enough to make you feel smart. So overall, just a fantastic baseline. In addition, we have a great tutorial. There are a lot of concepts. If you're familiar with deck builders, it shouldn't be too hard. And if you're familiar with if you're familiar with Netrunner, for example, it might all feel familiar. But I think if you're not familiar with those things, the tutorial does a good job of easing you into it. The tooltips work very well. So I actually have the game open already, right? So if I go look into the game real quick. So here we are on the command screen. And if I hover over something and I don't know what something is, like this says gain 1 feral. The tooltips, I can almost always count on them telling me what it is that I'm missing. So here it explains feral, and I really appreciated that. I appreciated that this tooltip system works very well, and it does a good job of making it easy. Like if you don't know something, because there are a lot of keywords, the game will tell you. Even though the game doesn't have like a built-in glossary or anything, it's still pretty good about that. While we're here, I love the UI. I think the UI looks fantastic. I especially love the UI during combat, but we'll see more of that later. So, if you've seen the other videos too, the UI during combat I think looks pretty good. Very immersive. And there are a lot of other things that I like about the game, but the one other thing I'll mention is that I really like the models on the Sentinels, which are the monsters that you fight. I like that my favorite one is the Tyson, where he'll kind of put up his hands, and then he'll have his subroutines, but if it misses or if it hits, he'll have a different animation depending on what happened. And I think that sort of thing is cool. I hope to see a lot more of that in the future. All right, so those are the big positives that I wanted to explicitly mention. So let's discuss the stuff that I hope to see in the future. But before I do, I want you to know that I have all this stuff written out in a Steam discussion post up on their forum on Into the Grid on the community page. If you just look for the one written by Jinteki, you'll see everything that I initially wrote after I beat the game for the first time. And you can even see what the devs responded with, and the devs were very good about responding. They responded to every single aspect of my post, which I wasn't expecting, and I didn't need them to do all that. That was pretty cool. So if you want to see exactly what the devs wrote, go ahead and check that out. I'll have a link to it in the description. Anyways, now we're on the feedback. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the terminology of the game. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on this. In my post, I had written out all the different terms that the game is going to throw at you, just to point out that there are a lot. But I don't mind that personally. I like the fact that there are a lot of terms. I like the flavor. I like the fact that, in Netrunner, you both players have a deck, but your deck is called the stack if you're the runner, and the other guy's is called the research and development. I love that sort of thing. My main issue is just with a couple of the terms that I felt were superfluous, or maybe they just were a little too abstract and didn't really do a good job of fitting in with the rest of the words, or maybe they weren't utilized very well. Now, a few of these I've come around on, so I have them up on the screen, right? I've highlighted the ones in yellow that I initially had a problem with, but some of these I've kind of turned around on, like exploit and extract. I think that's fine. I'm still not a huge fan of the word rehash, but I can't think of a better word, so I don't know what to do about that. Also, repository, I think that word is okay. I still think you could have just called it like your net deck or something like that, but it's whatever. I guess it's kind of thematic. Gates and bouncers. Now, this is one that the devs actually agreed with me on, because right now in the demo, gates and bouncers are basically the same thing. Like, every bouncer guards a gate, but defeating a bouncer is the same thing as opening a gate. So you don't really need both terms. It doesn't really add anything. I assume that they'd keep the word bouncer because that's one of the 3 different kinds of ice in the game. So that would make more sense. So they agreed with me on that. They said they were looking into that already, so that's cool. Ice, I just felt that they could be using that word a little more. Like, I would never advocate for them getting rid of that word. And I felt like there are 3 different kinds of ice in the game: the bouncers, the watchers, and the sentinels. But the sentinels feel very different because you actually fight those with your cards in combat. So I felt like they didn't really feel like 3 parts of the same whole the way I think they're meant to. So I just felt like that could be clarified a little more. Recycler, I just don't like that word. I just think it's a funny word. It doesn't really, you're meant to be your discard pile, but I don't think it's a very, unless I missed it at some point, it doesn't sound like a very like cyberpunky or even computer science-y term. It sounds kind of like made up almost. Am I wrong? If I'm wrong, just please let me know. But I would rather it have been called something else. Like, I mean, Netrunner calls it your heap, which comes from like the stack heap, from computer science. I think even just calling it like your refresh would have been a little better. You got words like recursion, although I don't know how you would fit that in and call that your discard pile, but I just don't like the word recycler. All right, I've gone on too long about the word recycler. Last one I'll talk about is glitch. And this one I do hope they change, because glitches right now are like the upgrades you get in the middle of a run. I think that's a little silly to call your upgrades a glitch, even though they said thematically that it's supposed to be them, or you're exploiting the glitches in the run. But I still don't really buy that. They said they don't want to use the word upgrades because they want to save that for other stuff, which we'll talk about in the second half of the video. But I think calling them like mods, although they said they might want to use mods for something else too. So I get they're running out of words, augments or something. I don't know, anything. I still don't like the word glitch. I would prefer that they change that. If they didn't change any of these terms, I wouldn't really care. Like, this is very low priority for me, but I just thought I'd mention it. So anyways, let's move on. All right, way more important than the terminology. Let's talk about all the issues I've had with clarity. And to demonstrate all this stuff, I'm actually going to get in the game here and make sure that I can demonstrate to you what all were my issues here. So let's start with combat, since once I get the combat done, it'll open up more of the map and I can demonstrate that stuff a little easier. All right, so first off, passive abilities. It bums me out that the passive abilities aren't always visible on the screen, because every Sentinel seems to have a different passive ability, or I mean, not every, I don't know how many different passive abilities they are, but they change quite often, right? And they're very important, so it would seem pertinent that they stay up on the screen the entire time, but you have to hover your mouse over it to see it, and that's annoying. I wish that the subroutines had more maybe reminder text. Maybe this could be something that you can turn on and off, but the one on screen isn't a great example, but I had a better example in my little slideshow. So for example, there's a subroutine that says gain 1 tagged. And I think it would be better if that subroutine could say gain 1 tagged and then in parentheses, shell cost +1. You know, something like that. I think that would be a little helpful. Again, maybe that's not necessary because they do have the tool tips. But again, you keep having one theme about the clarity thing is that I'm constantly having to move my mouse over stuff to see what it is. And then when I move my mouse off of it, that information disappears. And it gets a little annoying. I just think unnecessarily so. So, all right, my other issue is with the Vim, the max Vim, and the temp Vim. All right, so I don't have any cards right now to show temp Vim, but right now the bar has that little like gray bit at the top, which made it a little confusing for me to tell like when I actually had max Vim. It made it look like the bar was never full, and now I realize that max Vim is 20. I think I figured it out after like the third or fourth run or something like that. More importantly, the temp Vim is also included in that little bar, but it'll show blue. And that can get a little confusing, especially when the temp Vim makes it look like you have max Vim, but you don't actually have max Vim. The reason that's important is because temp Vim does not count towards conditionals. So, for example, on the cards here, you have one that says, if you have at least 10 Vim, instead do this, right? Temp Vim does not count towards that conditional. So it's a little annoying that it's shown in the same place as your regular Vim. The only thing the temp Vim is good for is commands, really. Also, there's no limit on temp Vim, which I didn't realize. So all those things put together kind of make the temp Vim, max Vim thing a little more confusing than necessary. I think the best way to fix this would be to have temp Vim be like its own separate bar, maybe above or below the regular Vim bar. I'm reminded of Legends of Runeterra, where they had like the spell mana, and spell mana was just mana that could only be used for spells. And they had their own little separate pips next to your regular mana so that it was easily differentiated from your regular mana. Okay, I think that's everything for combat. Oh, I almost forgot. Conditionals, we were talking about that. Right now, actually I have a good example here. So on this conditional here, you see that little gray bit on the card? It says, if you have at least 10 Vim instead. This one here says, if you activated at least one command this turn also. So this one is in addition to, while this one replaces one half of the card. Like you'll either do the top half or the bottom half. I don't think that is very clear the way that it's written out right now. Or maybe not clear, but when you're playing quickly, it can get confusing. I think it could be displayed a little better. So I suggested that, for example, at least the word instead or also be at the front of that conditional. I also suggested that maybe instead or also, you could make it more computer sciencey and replace it with and or, you know, that would be pretty cool. They said they tried that, but it got confusing for the people who were testing it. I don't know, but I think maybe they can color code it. There's a lot of things, but I think that was just a little less clear. I didn't realize that some of these were instead until like my third run. So, all right, I'm going to finish out this combat and then we'll come back to the grid. All right, so I did the one combat and then I've unlocked all 3 of the initial gates. Okay, so here are my other clarity issues. Number 1, the watchers and the bouncers. So right now, every cluster has what's called a watcher, or most, I don't think the starting one does, but I think that's the only one. A watcher is just some sort of, I guess little wrinkle while you're going through that cluster to like make it more dangerous. It'll up your trace, which can start to make the run harder if you let it get too high. But each one is different. So in this cluster here that I got my mouse hovered over, this is a combat watcher. Here we have an extraction watcher, so every time you extract, he ups trace. And here's another extraction watcher. All right. Now you can't see the watchers on the screen at a glance. You have to hover your mouse over the clusters to see which one's guarding what. And that can get pretty annoying, especially when you're just, you're trying to, it's a very high level thing. Like you're trying to plan out your moves from here, and then you got to keep on hovering over and, losing track of the data. And right now I only got the 3, but this can get yet even more confusing when you have like a whole bunch of these clusters open. On top of that, the bouncers also have their own conditionals. Like these are the gates that you use to get from cluster to cluster. You got the activity bouncer. Here's a hash key bouncer, another activity bouncer, an interlinked bouncer, and an interlinked bouncer. So you can't tell at a glance like what watchers are watching what and what bouncers are guarding what, which is very annoying. So I would appreciate there being more clarity there, as far as like I would like that information up on the screen already. Also, all the nodes look very similar. Obviously, the only differentiator is whatever their little 3-letter acronym is. I wouldn't mind some sort of like iconography to help make that a little more clear what node is what at a glance. Again, I would prefer everything be much more readable at a glance. That's my main issue here. It's the same issue I had in combat. I would like for the clusters to have some sort of line or boundaries around them so I could easily see the shape of the clusters, right? Like it's not apparently obvious. It's not super obvious the way that this grid is laid out, that these 4 belong to one cluster, these 3 belong to one. Again, you have to hover your mouse over to kind of see the general shape of what that cluster will be, which is, again, not ideal. Finally, the runs definitely get more difficult as you go on. I'm not sure exactly what is driving that. Like, I don't know if it's just how the maps are randomly generated, like the harder monsters are just going to be further away from your starting cluster, or I don't know if it depends on how many battles that you've done. But whatever it is, I would like that to be a little more transparent. So it would be nice if, like, for example, I have this node here with a sentinel guarding it. It would be nice if maybe there was like a level to the node, or maybe like a general, it doesn't have to be an exact level, but just like something telling you, hey, this is likely going to be a tough enemy. Or maybe, I don't know, if it's a global thing, like maybe like something up at the top besides your trace that tells you like, hey, the run is getting this much more dangerous, something like that. All right, that's pretty much it for clarity. To wrap up this part of the video, I have some miscellaneous suggestions that came to mind when I first beat all 3 missions. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I'm actually probably just going to read them off, because the second half of the video is actually going to address a lot of them. So let's just run through them real quick. First off, I would like for there to be a way to bypass ice without using an icebreaker in order to avoid combat. And the reason for this is icebreakers are pretty expensive. They either cost 2 hash keys, which means you have to do at least 2 battles, or they cost like 600 shards, which is a great deal. And you always need 1 for the final gate, or else you might have to take like 3 trays. Okay, so all those things put together, using an icebreaker on a sentinel feels really, really bad. But sometimes forcing yourself to do a combat, like let's say there's a combat watcher guarding a space, that can also feel bad. So it would be nice, maybe it's through some sort of glitch or ability. It doesn't have to be consistent, but if there was a way to bypass some of those sentinels, and I mean like go over them. So like maybe you're stuck on the other side because you decided not to fight them. Maybe it's a one-time use. I don't know how they implement it, but I wish there was some way to do that. I wish there were more ways to spend shards. There was one run where I had like 1,000 of them, but I had no way to spend them because there just happened not to be any nodes where I could spend my shards. So that sucks. That would be nice if there was a more consistent way to spend them. Spoilers ahead. I wish glitches were much more common. I felt like the glitches added a lot of the fun to the runs where I won, right? But you didn't get a whole lot of opportunity to get some. Sometimes you get lucky and you can get like 2 or 3, but most of the time I got like 1, maybe 2. And because you only choose between 2, sometimes they weren't that impactful. So I think more glitches, and then starting your run off with a glitch would make the runs all feel a lot better. I loved how fast playing cards was. I liked that when I wanted it, I knew what my turn was. I could just go slide, or swipe, and boom, I'm done. But playing cards did feel pretty lifeless, which shouldn't be the case, I think, because that's like the number 1 mechanic of a card game, right? I wouldn't want animations that slow the game down. I actually hate, that was like the worst part for me about playing Legends of Runeterra, was waiting for all those animations every single game after I've seen them 1,000 times. But I would like it if like there were more effects when you play a card. So maybe there could be like you throw a card out and there's code flying across the screen or sparks or more life to it. I would really appreciate that sort of thing. You know, if the cards are meant to be programs, maybe they could show the program doing something instead. Like for example, you had the claw swiping cards, which I didn't notice that they were claw swiping cards for quite a while. If you could see an actual claw clawing at the sentinels and it's a cool digitized claw, you know, that sort of thing. Traveling along the grid felt kind of boring. Not the puzzle about it was fun, but visually it was boring. I never got that feeling that I was, you know, like flying through cyberspace or traveling through some sort of matrix. I would at least appreciate it if like maybe even the background changed while you moved from cluster to cluster. I never really felt like my character was actually in any specific location. So I know that you have like a green square where you not physically, you know what I mean, where you are, but it never felt that way. So I would appreciate more life brought to the grid. Also, obviously more viable ways to build in general, more variety. Right now, I think in the demo, there are like 3 main ways to go about it. You can either go feral, grid, or high vim, and maybe you can do some hybrid of those, but those are like the 3 main ways. The feral one, I would not recommend. I think that you're probably gonna die every time, especially on that 3rd mission, if you try to go feral. So that it really only left like 2 really viable ways to build. And I would like to see more of that. I would like to see, you know, builds where you're breaking subroutines, builds where you're doing self-damage to yourself, that sort of thing. Speaking of which, I wish there were more ways to heal, because right now in the demo, it doesn't feel like health is much of a resource. It felt a little too precious to be just taking damage. Every time I took damage, I felt bad because I was like, dang it, you know, I only have so much of that. And healing can be a little bit expensive too, especially if you've lost a lot of health. Now, that might just be me sucking, so take that one with a grain of salt. And I think that's... Oh, wait, no, there's one more thing. Okay, but this is a bit of a weird one. I've seen it come up a couple times where people in forums or in discussion threads or on Discord, they'll be worried because they see the art and they'll think that it's AI art. Now, Flatline Studios has said that the art that they're using is not AI art and that all the art is made in-house. But it definitely gives off the impression of being AI art, doesn't it? And because of that, I don't like the art as much as I would like to. I also feel like a lot of the art is very abstract and it's not really telling like a lot of story on what a specific card is supposed to mean. Like, I would like to get an idea of what a card is supposed to be thematically without even looking at like the ability, but I never got that from any of the art. So I would recommend that Flatline Studios takes a look at their art and find ways to make it less maybe less abstract. I'm not 100% sure about that one. It's a bit of a weird one. If they don't change the art, I'm not gonna make a big deal about it, but you know, they're probably aware that they've been getting that feedback a few times. So just so you're aware, they do not use AI art according to them. Okay. All right. Anyways, that's the end of that bit. Finally, we get to move on to the most exciting part. Let's see what the devs have in store for us in the future. I have this sorted by implementation target, so it is sorted by how soon they expect to have it done by. They seem to have the timeline based off of their early access release, whenever that is. A link to this will also be in the description below. We begin with the Surface Shop, an in-run shop. So it looks like this would be a shop in the middle of a run that you can use in order to spend shards. It looks like it'll probably be independent of the nodes and the clusters, so you can always access this shop. That's a fantastic idea because it would directly address some of my feedback, which was that there aren't quite enough ways to spend shards, and you know, whether or not you have the opportunity to is very luck dependent. So this is very nice. I'm very much looking forward to this. By the way, we're covering all the stuff that is expected to be released before or at early release or early access. All right, number 2, we got in-run events. So the idea here is that you could happen upon just some sort of random narrative event in the middle of a run. You know, really great, would add more immersion, would add more variety to the runs, could possibly add more choices to the runs. So nothing to complain about here. Character selection. So you'll have different characters to choose from, and I presume each of them will have their own like unique special ability or abilities. So that's really exciting. More variety, more ways to play. Presumably they'll each have their own narrative to go through, so that'll be pretty cool as well. But of these 4 features that are probably going to be in the game before early release, the one I'm most excited for is definitely, well, it's probably a tie between this one and the Surface Shop, but this one, the card upgrade system. So I'm realizing I forgot to mention it, but another complaint I had was there wasn't a whole lot of ways for you to actually shape your deck. You know, it's a deck building game. Usually deck building games give you the opportunity to remove junk cards from your deck to make your deck more consistent, more powerful. There were nodes that allowed you to do this, but they were, again, very few and far between. And usually when I ran into them, it was better to just take the shards from them just because they gave a lot of shards. So I still felt like I didn't have a whole lot of opportunity to use that sort of mechanic. But this would kill 2 birds in 1 stone. Not only will you be able to remove cards from your deck, you'll be able to use those cards to upgrade other cards, making some of your more favorite cards stronger. Or maybe you can bump up the power level of some weaker cards and make your deck more consistent. That's super exciting. I think that'll add a lot more personality to each deck you build during the run. You get more choice, more variety. I'm all for that. Super excited for this feature. All right, next up, the stuff that is expected to be released at or shortly after early access. Of course, these are just expectations. I'm sure some of these might come sooner, some of these might come later, but all right, the first one, campaign and story progression. I mean, right now they have hints of the story in the demo, but there's not a whole lot of it. So this seems pretty straightforward, a campaign. That's going to be a pretty fun thing. Map UI redesign. They're looking to make the grid more exciting, more immersive than it is right now. I did say it looks a little boring right now, so hopefully this will be a very cool change. Grid procedural generation. So this is something more for them, for the development team. It seems like they want to have more control over the randomly generated maps. Like how many nodes and clusters does this map have, or where these enemies might land on the map, and that just seems like an objectively good thing. So yeah, I'm excited for more variety in the grids themselves. All right, now the stuff that is meant to come out shortly after or during early access. Missions. So the idea here is that you could run into NPCs in the middle of the run and they might give you a mission to accomplish. Maybe it's another objective that you have on top of finding the core node. Great. Again, more variety. Cannot complain about that. Meta progression. Now this is a very exciting one. The idea here is that you'll be able to upgrade yourself not only in the middle of a run, but in between runs. And maybe you'll keep those upgrades between run to run. To what extent, I'm not sure. It could be like a series of runs that are all tied together. They could be talking about the overarching campaign. They could be talking about something like in Hades, where you had the mirror, where you would upgrade yourself, and you could keep those upgrades for the run, and then you could reconfigure those whenever. Whatever it is, it sounds super exciting. So can't wait. Visual effects overhaul. Trying to overhaul the effects on the cards. Again, very exciting. One cool thing they're saying here is that they're going to try to have multiple effects for even the same card. So for example, some of those cards have those conditionals that flip, and this card might have one effect if it's on and another effect if it's off. That's pretty cool. I didn't even think of that, but that seems like too cool. Like you don't even need to do all that, but I'm glad they're doing it. Oh, by the way, this is stuff that they said they'll just get to it throughout the development, or maybe this means that this is something that they're constantly going to be working on, and that would make sense because to that effect here we have additional content. So they're just saying they want more of everything. More enemies, more abilities, more commands, more glitches, more missions, more items, all of that. Yeah, I want that too. That'll be exciting. I can't wait to see everything that they have cooked up for us. All right, now the rest of this stuff is stuff that they expect to get during some time in early access, which again, I'm not sure when early access is supposed to happen, so I don't know when all this stuff is actually coming, but some of this stuff here is probably where the weirdest stuff comes in. It's interesting. Let's start with this enemy brain system. So they say they want to work on a system that allows the AI to react to things that have happened in combat. So for example, if you played a certain card on a previous turn, maybe the subroutines for the next turn will change, or maybe depending on the trace level going into the fight, you know, the subroutines will change like that. It sounds like they just want better AI. I mean, they call it the enemy brain system. This seems like a fancy term for it. I'm not sure, unless I'm missing something, but that's what it sounds like to me, which is good. Again, like, I think it's fun if the run starts to react to all the choices you've made. So that would be pretty cool. This one is really weird. Enemy peripherals system. So they say they want to have you be able to target different parts of the enemies. I assume that you would select the target before you play a card or something. That's kind of neat. I mean, when I was playing, I didn't feel like the game needed something like that, but you know, I think this is the kind of game where the more options you add, the more choices, strategic and tactical choices you get to make, the more fun it feels when you finally get to the end of a run and beat it. So maybe you can choose to directly attack an enemy, or maybe you can choose to attack their weapon or something, and maybe if you disable it, their subroutines will change. Who knows? But I mean, that's pretty cool. So I am excited for this one. Console mod system. So this is, they're talking about accumulating points that you can use to upgrade your console, which is going back into that meta progression thing that we talked about earlier. Also, this sounds more specific to like what I mentioned with the Hades mirror. So that's exactly what this sounds like to me. Very cool. In-game codex / encyclopedia / glossary, I'm guessing. It would also have like lore snippets and short stories. Very nice, very nice. Controller support. Very nice, very nice. Achievements. Very nice, very nice. Data collection. That sounds dystopian. But what they mean here is that they want to be able to collect the data from the players playing, like, you know, which cards are getting selected the most, which glitches are getting selected most, what mods on your consoles are the characters selecting, what choices are people tending to make when they reach this random event, for example. So cool. Backgrounds upgrade. Okay, so they currently in the combat, they have like a 2D background, but they want to switch that over to a 3D background. Now this might seem like a small thing, but I'm going to pause here and go on a small tangent. There is one thing for this game that I would wish above anything else, and it's not on this list. It's something that I've always wanted, you know, when I start playing Netrunner, or when you read Neuromancer, or you do anything like that, you always read about these stories where people can, you know, don on some neural interface and full dive into a matrix and do their hacking that way. And I think that's so cool. It is amazing to me that despite all of the literature surrounding that idea, because that sort of idea shows up in Netrunner, Shadowrun, Cyberpunk, Neuromancer, etc. We have VR headsets, but we still don't have a game where I can role play that sort of thing with a VR headset. And that really bums me out. So how cool would it be if in a 3D environment you could don on that helmet and use those little, I don't know what they're called, VR grippy things, and you could play cards that way, and you could select things, clusters on the grid, and feel like you're actually hacking, you know, IRL. That would be the ultimate wish list thing for me. I would love that above anything else. It's not on this list though, just my personal wish list, so can never be expected of the devs, but that would be super cool. Okay, terminal widget. So at the top right of the combat screen, there's this little terminal looking text that it's just static. It's just there for decoration right now, but they say that they want to actually make it functional. And that is super cool. So they say they're primarily going to use it as like a combat log. So as things happen, it shows up in the terminal. But they say they also want to let you input text strings so that they can, you know, you can uncover things in the world, or they can put little Easter eggs or something like that. I think it would be really funny to have a mode where you could only play via that terminal. They call it like a hardcore mode. I would play through that, but I don't think that's worth the dev time to make something that only I would probably enjoy. So that's just a funny thought, but I'm super excited for that terminal to be an actual thing. Okay, so far every single thing on this list has sparked joy. This one does not spark as much joy. Oh, that's funny. Somebody replied, they actually added like a little Q&A here. I just noticed this because somebody asked, like, does this mean we're going to be playing Among Us in our game on Discord? Okay, so this one I still feel is very weird. So the idea here is that when you get to the core node, you're going to be playing some sort of hacking mini game just to make it feel like, hey, you're doing that final step of getting into the mainframe. I think that's a little weird for a couple reasons. One, first off, I've never come across a hacking game that really actually made me feel like a hacker. I don't think. The closest might be one in like Shadowrun Hong Kong, but most of the time I just feel like I'm playing some sort of weird puzzle and they're calling it hacking. Two, do you make this optional or not optional? And by that I mean, like, if you fail the mini game, is there a consequence to that? Like, what's the consequence? It would be annoying if you were to face some sort of consequence that had nothing to do with the rest of the game. And if it is optional, or at least like it's no fail, then it might feel a little pointless to have it in at all. So it's like this guy is saying down here, like, are we gonna play a little Among Us mini game right before, like, just cause? I think that this one you'd have to be pretty careful about the implementation. All the other ones I feel like are objectively good ideas. This one could be good, but it could also be bad. So I'm not so sure about this one. We'll see. I definitely think that they shouldn't spend too much time. If they were to drop anything, this would be the one that I would drop. Okay, lastly, super exciting, full voice acting. I did feel while playing the game that, like, you know, all the text scrolling by, I was like, this game could really benefit from voice actors, but I never brought it up in my initial feedback because it seems like this is a small company. I'm not going to be like, you guys should go hire a bunch of voice actors for all your voice acting. Like, I don't know how much text they're going to expect. I would never expect that. Even the Shadowrun games didn't have full voice acting. So, but they intend to have full voice acting. So that's pretty cool. And that's going to go a long way to making the game feel more immersive, more fun. So yeah. So overall, great list, great demo. Flatline Studios, keep it up. I love the game. I'm actually super excited for the game. If you haven't tried it for yourself, I'd at least recommend the first 2 missions. This is Jinteki signing off.